are closing out Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And we want to give all of you, our viewers out there, our followers out on social media, all different platforms, just really a look and kind of a mini history lesson, to be frank, about all the impacts that Asian Americans, Asian Pacific Americans have had within our community, and each story, each community, each neighborhood, just so vibrant. It's kind of like this tapestry of cultures that is making all this possible. So we'll explore the history. We'll explore different group stories. Looking forward to hearing from everyone here on our panel. Really important to recognize the role of immigrants, I believe, in the Chicago area and what that means, what that looks like from various Asian and Pacific Island countries. And how is that shaping not just Chicago, but our entire nation right now and what we're facing? So we have all kinds of different people who are here to contribute from the rich, diverse communities that we have. Influences and communities, I'm talking about countries like China, Japan, Korea, India, the Philippines, and all those journeys to the Windy City. So our guests today are going to sponsor or recognize their respective groups, if you will, and talk about the impact on just so many different things. I'm thinking about culture, food, business, how you help shape Chicago, just all those different things. So let's go right to our guests right now. Bin Lau, if you could just kind of give us a wave so we all know who you are. Yeah, there we go. I know your names are on my screen, but I'm not sure they're on everyone else's. So let me just tell you, currently the executive director of the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, which is the only Chinese American museum in the Midwest. That's amazing. Serves 8,000 visitors every year through a series of programs, exhibits, community events. And prior to this too, Bin was at the Chinese American Service League that we're also familiar with, CASEL, the most comprehensive social service agency in the Midwest, dedicated to serving the needs of people, all ages, all backgrounds of the Chinese community in the greater Chicago area. Now, Bin currently serves on the board of Consumer Action, that is a national entity which advances consumer rights and all matters relevant to diverse consumers and their needs, even advocating for them in the media and before lawmakers. So Ben, we want to welcome you.
Thank you.
Yes, nice to have you. Jean Mishima, can you just wave at us so we know that, thank you, perfect, is the president of the Chicago Japanese American Historical Society, a nonprofit organization, has been a board member since its inception, and we're talking about since 1990. As president, she chaired a committee in developing its first photo exhibit, Japanese American Team Spirit. Chicago, is it Nisei Athletic Association? Did I get that right, Jean? Excellent. With the support from the Chicago Historical Society, now known as the Chicago History Museum, where it was on display. So we would like to welcome Jean as well. Welcome, welcome. Next up, we have Dr. Evelyn de Assis Natividad. And Dr. Evelyn here is a very active and respected community member in the Filipino American, as well as the Asian American community. Great to see you. She's been recognized and honored multiple times over the decades, including, and you're going to have to help me with this, prestigious presidential Benang Award for Outstanding.
Banaag.
Did I get that?
Banaag.
Benang. Filipinos overseas from the president of the Philippines. So she was responsible for organizing the first Asian American festival on Daly Plaza. That's history, back in 1999, yes. Which has become an annual celebration, obviously, that we are all very familiar with. With her late husband, Cornelio, they helped get city approval for the installation of the 11-foot monument of her country's national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal. The only Asian hero monument ever erected along Lakeshore Drive. Piece of history, always a fierce advocate for human and civil rights. She has served many roles for the city and the state, including being part of a national lobbying effort for the passage of the Filipino Veterans Equity Act. That was critical. Snapshot of your life right there. So thank you, Doctor, for joining us. Dr. Yoon Tai Kim, welcome.
Hello.
See him here on the screen. So Dr. Kim is a resident of the Korean Cultural Center of Chicago. The Korean Cultural Center opened in Wheeling in 2010. Its concept, though, had started all the way back in 2004. So it was a concept, an idea in the making. Due to the growing Korean American population in the Midwest and the desire to establish a physical facility to promote Korean heritage and where the surrounding communities could learn about it too. We'll talk about that for all of your communities because it's almost like hubs, right? That we have that are so critical, so important. In 2005, the first set of bylaws was written, and the Korean Cultural Center of Chicago was granted its nonprofit status. And from there, community members made incredible efforts to raise awareness, to raise funds for the center there. So under Dr. Yoon's leadership, staff capacity has increased as well as board membership, major donors, revenue streams as well. And I might also add too, Doctor, you're a physician, a surgeon, as well as an attorney at law?
Not a surgeon, but I'm a retired radiation oncologist. But just by luck, I became an attorney here in the state of Illinois.
All right. A lot of brain power up there, I feel.
Actually, pure luck, actually.
It's all good, Dr. Kim. Thank you for being with us today. Totally appreciate
Thank you.
it. Okay, next up, we have Tejas Shah. Welcome. Yes, so Tejas is an immigration lawyer in Chicago, first generation American. His parents were among the early wave of South Asian immigrants to the US. That was in the 1970s. His life and career is steeped in the experiences of immigrants in the United States. He serves on the board of directors of the Indo-American Center, a nonprofit organization in Rogers Park, founded by Indian immigrants and now catering to the needs of immigrants from over 25 countries. Again, just the hub, the center of a community there. He also serves on the board of the South Asian Bar Association of North America. So I wanna make sure I didn't miss anyone, right? We're all covered. So all of you, welcome, welcome, welcome. And I just kind of want to toss it out there because so many of you have been part of building your communities. And let's talk a little bit about how things all got started. Who wants to kind of start us off with a history lesson here?
Oh, I guess I can start. In the late 1990s, the Chicago History Museum was developing an exhibit of Chicago Goes to War, and Scott LaFrance came to Yoji Ozaki and asked if he would help with the Japanese American portion of the exhibit. At that time, he asked Yoji, or suggested to Yoji, why not have an organization that just concentrates on the Japanese Americans in the Chicago area? And that's how we came into being.
Stacey, I'm happy to jump in and offer a little bit of perspective about, the South Asian and Indian community. And really, I mean, if you look at, the number of South Asians and Indians that were moving to the US up until the 1960s, it was really a trickle. Our immigration laws up until that point were not, conducive to South Asian immigrants coming here. The first Indian immigrant who tried to naturalize was actually turned down by the Supreme Court because he wasn't white enough, according to them. And it wasn't until the 1960s that the immigration laws really changed in a manner that facilitated the entry of a lot of Indian immigrants and South Asian immigrants more broadly. The Indo-American Center, which I serve on the board of, was founded in 1990 by that first wave of immigrants to help create the supports that they wish they had had when they had moved here in the 60s and 70s, but could not find. But the way that the Indo-American Center has evolved since then is also a reflection of how South Asian immigration to the United States has evolved. We are often called a model minority, and it's a bit of a myth because it doesn't truly reflect really the diversity of the community that's now immigrating here. And it often does a disservice to the community. The Indo-American Center recognizes how diverse the immigrant population is here today. Indians, for example, constitute, there are approximately 26,000 undocumented Indians in the state of Illinois alone. And we're one of the largest undocumented populations. You find people on varying scales on the income scale. And so our job is really to ensure that we are catering to people of all backgrounds and providing the type of community hub that you just referred to.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, I know they passed a law that from 1922, all the Japanese aliens or the Issei, your first generation immigrants that came here, could not apply for naturalization until 1952, right? And I forgot to mention our main goal of the Chicago Japanese American Historical Society, excuse me, is to educate the general public on the history of the Japanese Americans pre, during, and post World War II, how the civil rights were violated, and how euphemising words masked the true identity of what was happening to the Japanese Americans. And we do this through workshops for teachers, students at the elementary, high school, and college level. For example, during World War II, they used the words like internees, assembly centers, internment relocation camp. In actuality, since all the Japanese were evacuated off the West Coast and a forced removal, they really and arrested without any charges. The identical term should be incarcerees, and these incarcerees were moved to assembly centers, but actuality they were detention centers. And then they were moved again as a most permanent camp were built into an internment relocation camp, but actually they were American concentration camps.
Yes, they were. Yes. I mean, you know,
With-
I think it's important to dive into that historical part of the war experience too, especially among the Japanese community and exactly what you're talking about, the internment camps and what that experience truly was on American soil, right? So like, that's a great perspective there, and we'll dive into that as well a little bit more. Anyone else want to talk about the origins of community here?
Well, with regards to the Filipino American community, that was in October 18 of 1587, the first Filipinos set foot in North America and arrived in Morro Bay in California. That was 33 years before the pilgrims from England arrived in Plymouth Rock. So the first Filipinos became the first Asians in California. In 1763, the first permanent Filipino settlement was established in North America in Louisiana. The Filipino immigration began only after the United States acquired the Philippines after the Spanish-American War. The Filipinos settled in Hawaii and the West Coast in early 20th century. Filipinos typically came to Chicago area as students. The first Filipino government-supported pensionados, scholarship students consisting predominantly of men, for family-supported students arrived in Chicago in 1903. Schooling in America promised upward mobility and the key for a better life. So Chicago, with the great universities, night school programs, and technical courses of study, promise access to education and the employment frequently necessary to finance it. So in 1920s, the first group of Filipinos arrived in Chicago. They had to work in hotels and restaurants, for the post office, and the poorman's menial job due to discrimination. In 1927, the first Filipino umbrella organization, the Filipino Association of Chicago, was established with headquarters in Garfield Park at 300 South Hamilton Avenue at Jackson Boulevard. And would you believe the phone number was West 7257. That is the phone number. The building has a barber shop, a boarding rooms, and a meeting hall. Florentino Ravello was the clubhouse manager, and president was M.R. Cruz. There were about 2,000 Filipinos in Chicago by 1930. After the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 passed, Filipino immigration increased. Early associations in Chicago were the La Union Association, Nueva Vizcaya Association in Chicago, Philippine Women's Club, United Ladies Organization, and the Ilocos Sur Club. The Second World War, the Filipino Americans established themselves a hub as a social group with some civic activities at Webster Street in a private home. In 1972, a building at Irving Park and Clark Street was purchased through fundraising by the members of the Filipino American community. The Filipino American Council of Chicago was founded to administer and manage the business of the growing members of the club. In 1987, Filipino American Historical Society was founded by Estrella Alamar as president and Willie Buhay as vice president. In 1999, the first Filipino American Museum was founded. The main mission is to document, preserve, and disseminate immigration experiences of immigrants. And the first book on immigration experience, Filipinos in Chicago, was published by Estrella Alamar and Willie Buhay by Burns and Nobles. A series of painting was executed by Willie Buhay, Manila's celebrated design artist, during the Dinner Under the Stars, awarding him the first state Illinois award to Filipinos by Governor Edgar. The majority of Filipinos in the city of Chicago live in North Side and Northwest Side. The neighborhood, especially Edgewater, Uptown to the north, and Albany Park, Irving Park, Clinton Square, and West Ridge to the northwest. Suburban cities with Filipinos included Glendale Heights, Morton Grove, North Chicago, Skokie, Niles, Waukegan, and Wilmette. As of 2000, most Filipino work in the medical sector, engineering, business, education, and other white-collar jobs. The Filipinos tend to have higher income compared with the overall national average in the USA. By 2010 census, 139,000 Filipino Americans and multiracial Filipino Americans live in Illinois. 131,388 live within the Chicago metropolitan area. Chicago was home to 4% of all Phil-Am in the United States. And by 2018, it increased to 158,000, 1,100 in the census of 2018. In terms of age and educational attainment, 45% of Filipino immigrants reported achieving at least a bachelor's degree. As Asian groups, the Filipino had the highest annual median household income from 55,164 annually in 2000, and it was increased to 82,370 in 2013. Overseas Filipinos all over the world send money back to the Philippines. Filipino immigrants in the USA sent remittances for a total of $25.4 billion in 2013. And that's a huge amount of money that helps the overall economy of the Philippines. According to the 2010 American Census, there were more than 3.4 million Filipinos in the USA, making us the second largest Asian group in America, next to the Chinese Americans. By 2020, dozens of Filipino American healthcare workers have died due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, Filipino Americans became the most affected ethnic group by COVID-19 in the United States due to a combination of high percentage of healthcare work and essential work such as sanitation, delivery, and custodial. So new census data shows Filipino population in the United States grew to nearly 4.1 million in 2018. The 10 states with the highest population of Filipinos are California, Hawaii, Texas, Nevada, Washington, Florida, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey. Well, in closing, I would like to quote our NAFA President and National Chairman, Brendan Flores. He said, "The numbers bear out that we as Filipino Americans are an ascendant community in the United States, a community whose full power and potential has yet to match our significant and growing presence in American society. We have among the highest educational attainment rates. We are a significant force in the educational, health care, and service industries. We have over 100,000 proud military personnel and retired military veterans. It is abundantly clear our imprint on America is unmistakable, our contributions are undeniable, and our potentials is immeasurable." Thank you very much.
That is absolutely true. And let me just say on a personal note, my grandpa's from Luzon Island in the Philippines. So yes, I call myself a Mexipina because I'm very Latina, but I'm also Filipina. So like, I hear everything you're saying. So thank you for that. Like that was broad history from way back when to current day. So I'd also like to hear from obviously other communities we haven't addressed yet either. I don't know if Dr. or Ben, would you like to jump in here? Go right ahead.
Okay. Well, since Evelyn mentioned about the Chinese American is the largest, minority immigration group, and I am privileged to, to talk about, the Chinese Americans. Believe it or not, back in the history in 1785, actually 4 Chinese, seamen were spotted, on a ship called the Palace in Baltimore. But at that time, the Chinese immigrants were not, coming into this country in large numbers. And the reason why the Chinese, immigrate to this country has to go back to the 19th century. In the 1800s, when the Qing dynasty, the last, dynasty in China, the late Qing dynasty, because the ruler at that time was very, very not, doing his or her job very pretty well. And there was a lot of, warlords, fighting with each other. And there was a rebellion, it's called the Taiping Rebellion. Years of wars and the poverty and famine, forced a number of Chinese, they have to leave their homes, their villages to Southeast Asia to find a living. But, as time goes by, at around 1848 or 49, when gold was discovered in California. And at that time, they need, laborers to, to mine the gold. So there is some middlemen, they went to China, especially the southern part of China, to recruit the Chinese laborers and telling them that, you can come, to the US, there's gold everywhere. Whenever you walk on the road, you can pick up gold nuggets. So a lot of, Chinese, they were lured into coming to this country across the Pacific Ocean. Even those who were working in the Southeast Asia country, they joined the workforce. So many, the Chinese, they're even from the northern part of China, from Beijing, from Shanghai, they moved to the southern part of China. They went through Guangzhou, they went through Hong Kong, and then they aboard, the ship and then came to this country. So everybody knows the California gold rush is from 1849 until 55. After the gold rush died down, some of the Chinese, went back to China, bringing money, home, to build their house, the new houses. But some decided to stay behind. Those who decided to stay behind, they had to find a living. So they found jobs like in working as a laundry, laborers, and some, still, joined the forces in mining the silver. But until 1863, at that time, America is in a civil war, and the President Lincoln, found out that there's a need to build, a transcontinental railroad to connect the East and the West. So he signed a bill encouraging, some, private, railroad company to build the first transcontinental railroad. At first, they did not trust, the Chinese labor. They thought that they were weak, they cannot, withstand the harsh environment of building, the railroad, laying the tracks. So they try, but at that time, the Civil War is hard. It's hard to find, people, and especially, one of the railroad companies called Central Pacific, Railroad Company. They're responsible to build the western portion of the Transcontinental Railroad, and that terrain on the western part was very, and still is very, very difficult and very challenging. Few, laborers, wanted to take on those jobs. So they try, some Chinese laborers. They hire a small numbers of Chinese labor, but they found out that, wow, the Chinese, laborers, they could work longer hours and get less money. So they began to recruit more and more Chinese laborers. They even, went back to China, like the gold rush. They went back to China to recruit the Chinese laborers. So we can see, at that time, lots of Chinese laborers were coming to this country. At the peak of the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, there were about 12,000 to 15,000 Chinese laborers, laying the tracks, and consist of, I think it's accounted about 80 to 90% of the total workforce working with the Central Pacific, company. And after the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in 1869, the economy, went bad, and then, people start, blaming those, Chinese, laborers who decided to stay behind, blaming them, for lowering the wages and bringing in, bad habits like eating rats and whatnot. Then in 1882, there was an act, it's called the Chinese Exclusion Act, banning, Chinese immigrants. It is and still is the only law that bans certain, particular ethnic groups from entering the US at that time for 10 years. So there is a lot of harassment towards the Chinese, laborers who decide to stay behind. Some of them thought that they have to move, from California and start, to take, the Transcontinental Railroad, right? It was completed in 1869. And then some of them moved to eastward to central, like Chicago. So in 1830, the census, showed that, there were only three Chinese living in the US. But, the earliest record, recording the Chinese settling in Chicago is 1870. 1870. And then the first Chinatown in Chicago was established in 1880. The first Chinatown was actually in Chicago Loops area along the Clark Street between Van Buren and Harrison Streets. And by the end of 1800s, in Chicago, there were only 600 Chinese residents, but 25% of those, about 100 and something Chinese residents are living in the first Chinatown. In the first Chinatown, there are a number of stores, mainly their grocery store, drugstore, laundries, butchers stores, barber stores, restaurants, gambling houses, and the headquarters of family associations. And even there are 2 Christian mission houses in the old Chinatown. But, as time went by, some of the Chinese resident businessmen decided to move, from the original Chinatown to the current location, that is, by Wentworth. The reason behind it, the reason behind it was that, of the rent, because it's near downtown. The rent at the time was raised, to a level that, some of the Chinese businessmen could not afford. And they also blame, some landlords. They charge, higher rent to the Chinese than to the other, ethnic groups. So they thought that is unfair. They wanted to expand it, the Chinatown, so they moved to the current location in 1912. And we all know that, maybe some of you already know that, the current Chinatown in Chicago is the only Chinatown that is still growing in the US, even in the North America. There are a number of reasons behind that. The first is that, the Chinatown is committed to Chinese tradition. And there is, numerous services and agencies for new immigrants and Chinese speakers, like the Chinese American Service League, like MAHA, like Buitak Center. And then, the Chinese Americans, we value a sense of belonging, and we choose to stay in this neighborhood. and few Chinese move out. And if they do, they sell their homes back to Chinese. I know it's not right, but they always do that. They sell the homes back to the Chinese. And in Chinatown, the primary use of Chinese as a spoken language for business helps prevent Chinatown from existing as just a tourist attraction. People would come in and feel the culture here. So that is a little history of our Chinatown and the Chinese immigrant.
I love
Thank
it.
you.
'Cause exactly what you're saying. That is a thriving, living neighborhood that is just not a tourist attraction. It is all things living, right? And it's just a fabulous experience, period, no matter what. Last but not least, Dr. Kim, I want to obviously get to the Korean community too. And then after that, we'll just kind of toss out a few subjects that that all of you could chime in on as well. So, Doctor?
Thank you. Actually, and for Korean immigration to United States began in the mid 19th century. They started coming to island Hawaii as sugar plantation workers. And once that surge was over, then the people started migrating to the United States, settling in California. And then some of them moved to Chicago region. And the earliest settled immigrant to Chicago area was a preacher in the church, and leading preacher at that time was 1920, and then started growing gradually. But major influx of the Korean immigration to Chicago region, and along with the rest of the United States, began in near the end of 1960s and early on of 1970. Actually, I came to Chicago in 1972. At that time when I arrived, the Korean community was mainly on the north side of Chicago, along the Clark Street, north of Fullerton or Belmont. And then in a few years, the population grew and business grew, so they expanded to Lawrence Street and some neighborhood area. That businesses, a lot of businesses, department stores, and pharmacies, doctors' offices, and of course, they should come with many of the ethnic Korean restaurants there. So some of those who were at the time in the 1970s, 80s, as a hub of the Korean gatherings, as a business prosper, that activities revitalized the Lawrence Avenue area. So in around 1970, early on, they formed Korean American Association of Chicago. They worked very hard to get people mobilized and get together. That's where they started feeling that we must build some way to have people get together as a community center. That the thinking started again and strive. So eventually that became materialized with the inception of Korean Cultural Center of Chicago. And then Korean Americans in the business, a lot of businesses, mainly I think they started with some of the beauty products and wig, and I needed one, but that's how they became prosperous. And from there, started moving up to mostly north to Chicago, and then Niles, and west to Schaumburg and Naperville and adjacent areas. And then north-west side was more booming because of the convenience to O'Hare Airport and multiple other reasons. And now the expansion includes the village of Wheeling and Prospect Heights, Mount Prospects, and others, along with some expansion to the south side of suburb. So that's where the Korean Cultural Center of Chicago, fortunately, is residing in the village of Wheeling. That area is also very much expanding. And our immigration began and surged probably near the end of the Vietnam War. That time, a shortage of manpower in multiple corners of the areas in the business and other sectors. As the Filipino Americans surged in the healthcare, Korean American immigration also had lots of the room and the physicians and hospitals and nurses and healthcare centers. So that's one of those things along with other businesses. And they currently, the Korean Cultural Center's mission is to propagate Korean culture to mainstream American. And those efforts were recognized by last year, awarded the National Endowment for the Humanities, that matching grant of $600,000 to assist us to build 3 million over plus sub project that we are planning to build wonderful performance hall to meet the desire and demands of the increasing Korean American population, along with the mainstream Americans interested in Korean culture. And I think we owe a lot to the cultural aspects of, all of you know BTS, and then Parasite, and those, I think together that we have to go along with the demand and interest that the American mainstream goes, so that's how not only in terms of business and prosperous those regions where they contribute, but also culturally.
Right.
Asian culture can be major interesting point of our influence to the and a contribution to the mainstream America is what I predict in the
You know,
future.
Doctor, that is like such an interesting jumping off point, because I want to ask all of you, I mean, and it's just kind of like, okay, we're all diverse here, right? And how
Right.
many of us have had that experience of being guessed as a different culture from a different country? Do you speak this? Oh, you're not that? Oh, sorry. You know, I don't know if all of you have had that experience. I know I have even. And I guess, what is it that you would like to share about the unique perspective that you would want people using this platform to understand about your culture specifically? Because we're all diverse, we're all different, we all have different histories. And yet I think that all of you would have maybe a message that you really want to get across during this point to let people know, hey, this is what we're about. This is what I believe we're about. What do you have to say to that?
Well, I would like to say first, and I would like the public to know that, the Chinese, contribute to this country, the economy and infrastructure of this country, like the Chinese, help build the Chinese, the transcontinental railroad and the railroad, and help build America. And also I would like, the people not to connect, the Chinese with the current pandemic. Don't say, that word, what flu, is nothing to do with the Chinese, and we actually, during the pandemic, the Chinese community had, really a lot of people, trying to help, frontline workers. There's a number of, organizations in the Chinese community. They donated, face mask, they donated, some, food, especially from the restaurants. They donated those to the frontline workers, to the police, so we are helping, try to minimize the adverse impact of this pandemic. We are not the one who started it. So I would like the public to know that. And as a museum, well, our mission is to advance the appreciation of the Chinese culture through the exhibition, the education and public programming, and to preserve the past, present, and the future of the Chinese Americans, especially in the Midwest, like the one in Chicago. We are documenting, the events, happening, in our community, and we saw that there is nothing that the Chinese American were not doing to help, the community, to help the economy. We are all one family. We are all should be in together. We should not blaming each other. So that's the message that I want the public to know, that we can learn from history, right? But for this pandemic, we are not the one who started it.
So let me just, I'm thinking of two different things here, continuing on this thought process of what others of you might want to share about what you want people to know about your communities. But you're also bringing up a very timely issue about really how poorly, in some cases, our communities have been treated too during this time. And not just one, but it seems like it's hitting several of us, right? So anyone want to touch on that? Or if you want to just keep the upbeat theme too of sharing what you want people to know about, either way.
Well,
But
I think,
about
Go ahead,
Japanese,
I'm sorry, I thought I heard
we
you.
don't have a Japantown like the Chinese, because to have leave clearance from the concentration camp, they were told not to congregate in groups, and a lot of them came to Chicago because Chicago was supposed to be a welcoming city, because there was a labor shortage here, because all the factories and so forth in Chicago rebooted to make electrical ammunition and tanks to support the war effort. So the many different civic and religious organizations helped bring internees here. But what I want to say is, although Chicago is a welcoming city, they were encouraged not to congregate, only speak Japanese when it was necessary, not to form any organizations and things like that. So you have your fifth, sixth, seventh generations. Basically, they're very well assimilated. Like all my children basically have married, and my grandchildren are bicultural. And I'm proud to be, like, I felt like I was displaced. Like, we lived on the west side. I attended 4 different grammar schools after when we came to Chicago. I didn't feel like I belonged in the white population. I didn't feel like I belonged with the Asians either, because we only knew one Oriental family. So it was a very hard to get adjusted. I don't know how my parents able to do it, given $25 and a bus ticket to wherever they came to Chicago, and to start life all over again from scratch because they lost everything. But I feel I've recognized my ethnic identity, and I feel like I'm proud to be a Japanese American, but I don't think I'm being disloyal by embracing my ethnic heritage, because I think in this country we have all these different ethnicities, and to embrace it, I think this makes the United States stronger. And I think if we all work together, it would even be that much more stronger.
Pages, what did you want to add to that? It looked like you had something to say as well.
Yeah, I think that in some ways, building off of what Ben Lau said, really the story for all of us as immigrants is often, people of color, is that we're often viewed as outsiders, and there's this perpetual viewing of us as outsiders. And I think it's a constant battle to overcome that, otherness that gets created. And similar to what Jean said, I think it's possible to hold 2 identities at the same time. You can both be South Asian or Indian, and you can be American. And I think that's true of many immigrants who may hold, their heritage and their extended family very dearly. I can tell you right now that it's so strange, on the one hand, to see how much the situation around the pandemic has improved in Chicago and the United States, where we can go out and eat dinner at a restaurant and go to movie theaters again and go to, do things like that. But we know that our extended families in India and in South Asia more generally are really struggling right now. They can't find hospital beds. And so, I think we just have to acknowledge and embrace the fact that, that's what it means to be an American. You can have an identity here and you can also have an identity in another country. And going to your previous question about, the message I'd want to send, well, there are two things I'd want to say there. One, I'd want to say that, for the community as a whole, I think that it's important to recognize that the South Asian diaspora is diverse. Oftentimes people think that, well, South Asians, they're Hindu, they're this, they're that. We have the second largest Muslim population in the world in India, and there are Indians and South Asians of so many different backgrounds, cultures, religions, et cetera, here. But related to that is this idea of inclusivity, the idea of tolerance and the idea of really being inclusive of different viewpoints. And the Indo-American Center, which I'm proud to be associated with, is really, really big on almost this fierce secularism. The idea that it does not matter who you are. If you're an immigrant and you're trying to assimilate yourself to this country, you're welcome here. And I think that's important not only for the broader public to be aware of, but frankly, I think even our immigrant communities, because I think too often the community that I might come from, or a community that one of the other panelists might come from, we all bring our own biases to the table. And those biases, which we may have held in our home countries, often tend to continue to exist even after we move to this country. And it's important to see opportunities for solidarity, to folks in the South Asian community. I would remind them it wasn't that long ago that 9/11 happened and South Asians were, being persecuted and ostracized because they were mistakenly being viewed as associated with, the horrible events of that day. So that's what I wanted to say.
I think that whole unity message is really important. Doctor, did you want to add to something like that?
Yes, I agree with all of your wonderful comments on those current issues and what we can somehow survive and overcome and thrive for better unity. What I believe is that the otherness is what many people had a fear of resentment and other feelings. Those were not that much brought up until recently, but I feel that what the way that we may overcome is that number one, to recognize the reason behind so-called current perhaps racism, and those are because of some fear of not knowing others. So I strongly fear cross-cultural exchange, learning others through the cultural exchange and inclusiveness. We understand others, then we get together. So at first, when I first came in, fortunately to Chicago area, this was much milder, gentler region among the other parts from the other parts of the United States. So I did not fear that much of the pressured otherness. But now that the feeling has been increasing, but somewhere I think media role can be really great by providing those future direction of intercultural, more of the events and other happenings for programming for intercultural exchange, not only within Asian Pacific, those groups of other ethnic groups, but mingling with all American white and British and Polish and others, that learning, unless we learn others, it's very hard to accept others. So That's why I feel intercultural exchange and cross-cultural exchange and learning could be led by mass media like ABC. So that's why I strongly feel that appreciate this occasion.
Well, I'm so happy that all of you are here because I mean that in itself, that's the lesson, right? That all of us are sitting here together talking about these issues. And
Exactly.
I take that note, appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
I want to say right now it's 2:50, and I just want to give each of you, I mean, how many of us are here? So we have like 2 minutes each. I'm going to be kind of like being aggressive about the time here because I want all of you to have your say on your final thoughts, your final message that you'd like to get across. So starting with, it's 2:50, and at 2:52, I'm going to change the speaker. So who would like to start?
Okay, as Filipino Americans and Asians, we contribute to the economy and vitality of our city. I think we need to unite, engage, and empower our communities through leadership, development, engagement, and advocacy. We have to speak up because we are not invisible anymore. And I think that the Asian American should be part of the curriculum so that people will understand who we are. It should be included in the curriculum, and the Chicago Public Schools should be able to set and talk to the Asian community so we can be part of the curriculum of the education in Chicago. Not only in Chicago, but all over the United States.
Lessons to be learned, right, Doctor? Thank you very much.
I would like to say that I'm very proud of the young people in the Japanese American community because they are speaking up. There's the Tsuru for Solidarity. There's a group that goes to the Cook County Jail every Sunday to protest what happened there, especially with the COVID. Or one, I forgot the lady's name, but her husband died with COVID, being held in the Cook County Jail. And there's other different organizations that these young people are doing. I'm very proud that they are speaking up because that's what happened with the Japanese Americans during the incarceration because they did not speak up. And that's what we have to speak up when we see something is wrong. And we have to speak up for everyone, not just our own ethnic group, but for everyone.
When there's injustice out there, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I guess, I agree. I totally agree with other, champions here, that, we have to improve the cultural exchange, in our agenda, particularly. And we need to, enhance our education system too, like the Teach Ed just, passed through the Senate, and our museum is a place for education. So we have, histories of the Chinese Americans. We preserve, our culture. So if anyone who wants to know more about our culture, you're more than welcome to visit our museum. And our museum, has other, public programming too. Like we have the Chinese New Year event, we have the Mid-Autumn Festival event, and we also joined the Chinese New Year in the Chinatown parade. And in the summer, we have summer fair. We have a lot of cultural events that you can learn and feel our culture, so that we can understand each other better. Then when we understand each other better, then we have less conflicts.
Yeah.
Yes. Understanding and even reaching out to one another. I completely agree with that.
Yeah, on that note, oh, sorry, Dr. Kim, go ahead.
No, go ahead. And, you go ahead.
On that note, I think my closing thought would really just be, to note that the, Indian and South Asian community's story of immigration to this country has really been one of diversity. And I'm thrilled, but it is a uniquely American story too. And I'm really thrilled to see that, Illinois passed the Teach Act, which, will incorporate Asian American history into, the educational curriculum, because everyone should learn about Asian American history. It isn't, that is an American story as well. And I'd really love to invite, our audience to come up to the Rogers Park, Devon Street area to learn more about the Indo-American Center. We're really a unique organization that caters to the needs of a very, very, very diverse South Asian population. It's been a critical lifeline for the community during this pandemic. Thanks to everybody for tuning in today.
That when I first came to the United States, I was so happy that America is the place as an exemplary place for multi-ethnic, multiracial groups, people get together in harmony and peace. And that's what my belief is. That's how in the world it should be, and for the long-term future too. So that's what I think main goal of it, along with each other's learning. My thought was that the media's role as in the proper and right direction to lead the people would be so tremendously effective. So it's almost like a fourth government. That's why I appreciate really this opportunity to express ourselves and providing this venue for us to get together. And you have been doing a great job. And I wish that you continue to do it so we all get together and you put all the goodwill of people together and great impetus we can start. Thank you so much.
You know, Doctor, I have to give credit where credit is due. And I know her picture is on the screen, but Deanna, you do have to say a few words about that because you really brought all of this together. And, you know, before she does that, I just want to thank each and every one of you for doing what you're doing in communities and in these places where people can learn, and you're throwing out the welcome mat. Like, I just love that feeling that being here, I think all the viewers out there and who are watching, I just hope they feel the same way on just realizing that you are welcoming us, you're inviting us, and you're hoping we take advantage of that and go see you. So I just have to thank you. Deanna, do you want to say
Thank you, Deanna.
Yeah, thank you, Deanna.
Thanks, Deanna and Stacy.
Yeah, Stacy.
No, she's being quiet at the moment, but she has put this all together, and I want to make sure she recognizes that too. And for all of you out there, anything else you'd like to say before we let this go? I know she's trying to reach out to me. She says I could add anything for her. So I just wanted to say, you know, Deanna's done a great job organizing all of this each and every week and giving everyone voices. And I think all of your voices, I hope you felt like your voice was heard today, because that was our goal. Our goal is to make sure we hear you, we hear your experience, and that we all come together. And hey, I'm ready to go to everybody's center. So like, stand by, road trips on the way. But thank you all so much. Thank you. And I want to thank everyone for joining us out there too, whether you're online, whether you're on any of our social media platforms. I hope you enjoyed this discussion today as much as I've been able to listen and learn so much history. So thanks to all of you panelists as well.
Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Stacy.
Deanna. It's been great. Thank you very
Deanna.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and with that, we would like to close this and just say thank you so much for being a part of this as we continue our town halls here on ABC7. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.
We'll
Bye-bye.
visit all of you.